Hello, and welcome to this discussion about data security in the modern enterprise. I'm Jack Poller, Senior Analyst with Enterprise Strategy Group, and I cover data security. Joining me today is Purandar Das. Purandar, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Thanks, Jack. I'm Purandar Das. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sotero.
Thank you. And since we're going to be talking about data security, I thought we'd just start with what are some of the data security challenges businesses face today?
I mean, there's many challenges. I think the simplest way to understand it is the threat of data loss and the impact of companies losing data. The threat is both external and internal. External, you read about it everywhere, right? Ransomware has now evolved to data exfiltration or data theft, and then using that data to hold the companies to ransom. The other part is internal or insider threat, which could be one or two things. It's malicious activity in trying to steal data or access data. It could also be inadvertent visibility or access to sensitive data that companies or users should never see.
Yeah, I think we see a lot of issues with sort of data loss. And my research shows that about 39% of organizations have lost sensitive data, and particularly in the cloud. And then we see another 20% think they've lost data, but don't know for sure, most likely because they don't have the tools in place to understand what's going on in their environment. So how does, we've seen a lot of shift of data and workloads into the cloud recently. How does that sort of impact data security?
Oh, tremendously, right? I mean, when companies talk about losing data in the cloud, it's because they're not as comfortable or confident in the environment or the ecosystem they've built. On-premise or legacy environments have been around forever. And even if data is not traceable, there's still that comfort that it's somewhere within that environment. When you go to the cloud, it's a completely new environment where the same level of visibility, governance, and control doesn't exist. But companies have to move data there for those platforms and those operations to be meaningful. Moving data there, not having the same level of visibility leads to this issue of what data has been moved there. Is it still secure? And in many cases, not even knowing if the data has been accessed maliciously or inadvertently.
So it's a pretty complex environment, right? Things are moving pretty fast around the cloud.
Extremely fast, right? I mean, when you think of all the innovation that's happening in technology, it's mostly or predominantly in the cloud. So companies are caught in this situation where if you want to leverage the technology and the unique capabilities that are being innovated, they have to move to the cloud. But then you don't have the same level of control, and it's extremely complex for an organization that's not used to those environments, nor do they have the resources or the skills to understand them completely.
Right. And, one of the things we see when we talk to a lot of organizations using the cloud is it's really hard to understand what's going on because things are moving very fast, right? You have SaaS applications, so you don't have the same level of control in your SaaS applications as you do when the applications were running on-prem because the data, the storage isn't controlled by you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Right. And then you look at with IaaS and infrastructure and people developing their own applications running in the cloud. Developers are doing things all the time, moving data around, creating new databases, tests of databases. Does that cause problems?
Oh, it absolutely does. So fundamentally, the need for data, right, hasn't gone away.
Right.
The controls and the governance is not quite the same as it's in the cloud. That's always been in legacy platforms. But you also can't become obstructive to developers in innovation by putting in too many controls where they can't access or use the data to drive platform development. So now you're stuck in the situation of how do you facilitate that by not becoming an obstacle, but still try to have some semblance of control and visibility. which is if the company itself is developing an application, then you think about SaaS platforms. Other than the providers telling you that the data is secure, you really have no other visibility or control. You have to move the data. Once you move the data there, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, right? And that is only after the data has been moved. Moving the data there is also an equally big challenge because it's not as simple as saying, here's my data, I can upload it in one step. It's not always the case. There's a lot of processing, there's a lot of staging that has to happen that's outside of the SaaS platform controls and also outside of the controls that the company has built. So it's this gray area where data is being staged that also poses a pretty big threat.
Right. So if we think about that, and we see that a lot of organizations have lost data in the cloud. It's a big issue. What's sort of the first steps we should be thinking about as we think about securing our data?
I think knowing where your data is, what's in the data asset, and understanding the risk that the data asset potentially poses is important. And I mean, in a simple way, it's identification and classification of data as it moves around. Right, that's the first step. Without knowing where the data is, it's going to be hard to secure it.
Yeah, so we see. I think people might be familiar with the recent data breach at Caesars Casino in Las Vegas, and they lost their customer loyalty database. And one of the things they discovered after the fact in that their customer loyalty database contained people's driver's licenses and social security numbers, and that's pretty sensitive information, right? So they didn't know exactly where the data is, possibly. They didn't understand exactly how sensitive the data was. And somehow that data was exfiltrated, right? The bad guys got it and stole it. So as an organization says, okay, I need to find my data, all my data, so I can make sure it's all secure, and I need to understand it and classify what it is. What tools are available? What do we think about in terms of finding and classifying our data?
I think there's two pieces to finding and classifying data, right? I mean, one is if it's a known data asset, going in there and analyzing the data asset for sensitive content within that. Then there's the other part of it is knowing if there's a data asset that you're not aware of. So there's two pieces to it. One is scanning an entire ecosystem and identifying where data assets are, and then diving deeper into those data assets and saying what's within these data assets that could potentially pose a risk.
Right.
In terms of tools, that's a pretty rapidly evolving ecosystem, right? Where there's companies that are building platforms and frameworks that help organization understand what data assets are within an ecosystem, and also more granularly identifying sensitive attributes within those data assets.
Right. One of the things my recent research on data has shown is that organizations today are overconfident in the capabilities of the tools they have at their disposal. So we asked organizations, how confident are you in your ability to discover all of your data in the cloud? And how confident are you in your ability to classify that data correctly? And 93% of organizations told us they were extremely confident or confident in their ability to discover that data. However, when we looked at how organizations lost data, 19% of organizations lost data that we call shadow data, or data that they didn't realize was stored somewhere and somehow it got stolen. Again, when we look at classifying your data, understanding what it is, 91% of organizations said they were extremely confident or confident in their ability to classify the data, yet 33%, fully one third of organizations who lost data, lost it through misclassification. So those are sort of big issues that we have. So I think that that's something that organizations like your organization, Sotero, are looking to address, right?
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned the overconfidence in potentially believing that you know where all the data is and what's in the data asset, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think about any organization out there, the complexity of the environments that their users and their applications operate in is really massive, right? I mean, that's what drives the business. Um, an organization can never be overconfident in believing that all of their data is secure. I mean, that's been proven over and over again.
Right.
Absolutely. And it's not just understanding where the data asset is or what's in the data asset. There's other steps to it, right? I think companies like Sotero, at Sotero, we believe that it's a multi-phase approach to securing data. Obviously, knowing where the data asset is and what's in there is critical. But we kind of say, in addition to that, you also need a level of security or data protection that makes sure that even if a mistake occurs, your data still stays secure.
Right. So part of that is, I think, isn't it understanding who has access to the data and ensuring that only the correct people have access to the data?
Absolutely. Understanding who has access to the data, ensuring the right level of data access or privileges, if you will, but also putting in a framework that says we can detect if somebody unauthorized or if somebody maliciously or inadvertently tries to access a data asset.
Right. So you talked earlier a little bit about sort of protecting that data, even if somebody does get hold of that data. How do we do that?
So one of the things we do at a Sotero is providing that capability, and it all revolves around encryption, right?
Mhm.
Most people believe encryption to be protecting data all the time, and it's really not that. It's encrypt. Today's encryption or the legacy approach with encryption just protects data when it's not being used,
Mhm.
right? And it's static. We take a more dynamic approach to it and say our encryption travels with the data, right? We actually provide this notion of encryption of data in use, which means that we are able to protect data even as it's being used. And that facilitates the travel of that encryption or the porting of that encryption to wherever the data goes. So even if there's a shadow data asset, as you mentioned, with Sotero, the data asset is encrypted even if a shadow copy of that data is made.
Right. And I think, I think we have a couple of real incidents that I think highlight how important encrypting your data is. Unfortunately, they were both with Microsoft right around the time that the MGM and Caesars data breaches were in the news. Microsoft also had a couple of breaches. They released a data set for artificial intelligence, and unfortunately, in that data set was a whole bunch of internal data, private data that they had that was not encrypted. And so by releasing the wrong data and not encrypting it, everybody got access to internal company information, right? And that included backups of people, chat messages, and personal data, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's one example. The MGM example is another one as well, right? With technology like ours, instead of leaving the decision or the responsibility for the person making the copy or moving the data, if that's becomes a part of the process of anybody moving data, then you have the security envelope that travels with the data. So you don't have to worry about potentially leaving unencrypted or sensitive data accessible to anybody inadvertently.
I think that's both really important and really cool. I look at it, and one of the things I always say is relying on humans to be your frontline security is a big problem because humans make mistakes very, very easily, right? And we forget to do things like protect the data appropriately, and we're very busy, and we're also easily manipulated and conned. Whereas if you tell a computer to do this, it will do it every single time. It never forgets, right?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's no secret that security teams and security resources are under extreme stress, right? Because of the responsibilities they have, the complexity of the platforms, and to your point, potentially one of the resources or an unskilled resource, an untrained resource, trying to do a job is bound to make mistakes, right? It's going to happen sooner rather than later. The idea for us is to make that a part of the process so that it's automated and it's not a question of did somebody forget to do this. It just becomes a part of the process where even if somebody forgot to do it, it's been done.
So we talked a little bit about sort of some of the risks of data and data loss, and so how do we detect an attack like the MGM attack and detect data loss?
So and that's the other part of that security envelope, right? Or posture, if you will. One
Mhm.
is data encryption, making it a part of the framework so that it happens all the time. The second part of that is the discovery and classification, which makes sure that all of the data and all of the attributes, sensitive attributes, are identified and tagged for protection. The third piece is what I said about if somebody were to inadvertently or maliciously attempt to access the data, how do you stop that? We provide what we refer to as anomaly detection or automated threat detection and prevention. We've developed proprietary machine learning models that look at every activity that's going on the data, and we're able to identify in real time a potential misuse or malicious attempt to access and use the data. That's the third part of that security posture that's critical in helping organizations protect data at scale.
So when you say machine learning, that's really a form of AI, right? That you're using to try to find these anomalies. Can you give us what sort of an example of anomaly that would indicate that you have a security issue?
Yeah, so this various it is a form of AI. It's a highly tuned and well trained machine learning model that is looking at all of the activity against the data asset or any data asset in real time. Some of the anomalies that we can the model can detect is did somebody spoof Jack's user ID, for example, and try to access a data asset. There's behavioral patterns associated with how Jack interacts with data. Those to a human eye can't be discerned, but in a model or an automated model will stand out. Did he log in at the wrong time of the day? Did he come in from a different IP address? Is he using a new application? Is he trying to access a different data asset? Is he trying to do a bulk data exfiltration that he's never done before? These are all things that stand out.
Right. So interesting ways to detect what's going on in our environment. And this is looking at just our data, or what other types of signals are we looking at? You mentioned things like login and IP address. I assume there's a whole lot of data you're looking at to do
We
this.
are looking at a huge variety of attributes that are associated with that request. It spans anywhere from IP address, geographic location, time of day, application's signature, the type of data that the user is going after, whole variety of things.
Right. So I think part of this is we've been talking a lot about data security, and a lot of people are using a couple of acronyms, DSPM or DSP. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what those mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so DSPM at a very basic level is the evolution of a comprehensive data protection framework for data. Ironically, if you think about cybersecurity or security today, it's been mostly about everything but the data. And the irony there is what attackers are going after is the data asset or the data or information that companies hold, right? It's been about network security, it's been about endpoint security, it's been about application security, it's never been about data. Right, and the reason for that is any security protection for data typically ends up being an obstacle for data access and use. So that's
Mhm.
prevented or prohibited companies from trying to build data security products. Given what we just discussed about the complexity and the challenges associated with extremely complex technology ecosystems, it's becoming imperative that a broad security platform that starts with data protection at its heart and provides a uniform set of security capabilities for data is needed, right? It's not possible to manually kind of manage this whole process, and that's where this data security posture management or data security platform notion is evolving.
Right. So these are tools that are, I liked what you said earlier about sort of, security has been focused on everything but data. And I think that's been a big challenge when we look at it, that over the years we developed things like endpoint security and network security and infrastructure security, and we have big data analytics tools called SIM and XDR that do a whole bunch of data analysis of security telemetry, but they're all focused on sort of that external attacker and not on how do we protect our data itself.
Yeah, and I mean in a very basic way, right? If all, the The real challenge is the complexity of the ecosystems, right? You talk about endpoint or firewalls. Typically, companies have not been able to identify or shut off all of the access points into the environment or into the network or into the data itself, right? That leaves gaps or that leaves vulnerabilities which attackers are exploiting every day, right? I mean, we spoke about the Microsoft data asset being out there. If the environment was locked down and controlled, nobody should have been able to see the data. It's never the case. There's just too many access points and too many challenges. So we've taken what we consider an inside-out approach and say, start with the data, right? At the end of the day, you want to have a backstop or a fail-safe if everything else doesn't work, right? That's the bottom line. The second part of that is there is a need for providing a automated platform or a process that says all the way from identifying data assets to identifying and cataloging sensitive attributes in there, managing the access, and making sure that the users have the right privileges, but also putting in a threat detection framework on top of this. That's what the Sotero DSPM is, and that's what a true DSPM should provide.
Right. So, how does it sort of fit with existing things like ransomware detection or antivirus or some of the other tools that we have available?
Sure. I mean, you also mentioned the SOC and the SIMs, right? I mean, truly, they're all post-event platforms. By the time something gets triggered in a SOC or a SIM, that event has already happened, which means the damage has been done.
Right.
The true posture should be real-time threat detection and prevention. So that's the difference with what we do. Same thing with ransomware or antivirus system, right? They're sitting on endpoints and analyzing the activity at the endpoint to see if there's a signature that they can be tracked and traced. What happens if there's a new attack or if there's a new vehicle that's bringing in the attack, the threat vector, right? How do you protect yourself? That's where we come in and say we sit on the data asset which they're going after and making sure that no threat impacts the data asset. The flip side of our approach is it also provides for cyber resiliency, which means a much faster time to recovery, right? If you lose data and if the data was left unprotected, you have two issues. One is trying to recover from a backup, which in itself is a painfully long process, impacts your business. The other threat there is your data is being held against you because as we discussed, the MGM thing had their loyalty database in there, right, with sensitive information. Do you want that to be in the hands of an attacker with them saying, pay us or we're going to put this into the public space?
Mm-hmm. So, but you're not talking about the DSPM data security platform replacing the post event tools, right?
Absolutely not. I mean, absolutely not. The SIM and the EDRs, right? They cover more than just data. They actually cover other real-time operational application platforms, right? There could be vulnerabilities in there. There could be behavioral trends in there that you want to monitor and stuff. So we actually think a DSPM should be a part of the broader framework. As we discussed, we are providing automation and true protection and threat detection for a portion of the ecosystem that is not protected. So we actually fit into the broader framework of the security deployment.
Right. So it's really much more part of a layer in defense in depth, right?
Absolutely. A layer, certainly a layer in the defensive posture, but a layer that provides a couple of critical capabilities, right? One is make sure your data is protected regardless of what happens. The second one is identify in real time and prevent a threat to your data asset.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And let's talk a little bit about sort of how easy it is to get up and running and sort of get started with a solution like this.
Sure. One of the things that we pride ourselves with the DSPM thing, right? I mean, as we discussed, we're talking about extremely complex ecosystems and environments, right? We want to provide organizations with multiple entry points as to where they get started in this journey. It is going to be a long journey for a complex organization. So if an organization wants to get started with data classification and discovery, that's an entry point. Where we recommend they get started is protect your data. right, from internal and external threats. That's a fairly easy entry point to get started with. You can either start at the classification piece, or you can start with the data protection piece and then grow into the broader platform capabilities.
Excellent. So as we sort of think about, sort of our discussion around data security, and there is a big security challenge organizations have, right? And they are today losing data with the existing tools they're using. And there's this new way of thinking about it with the SPM as another layer, providing more real time protection, more real time detection. So if you think about all that, what sort of, if you had to sum up everything in sort of a couple minutes and sort of sum up the discussion, where are we today? And what should people be thinking about sort of overall in terms of, Sotero and a DSPM solution for them?
Sure. I mean, the like I said, the simple thing is we encourage our customers and our prospects to start thinking about how do you protect yourself or how do you protect your data in a
Mhm.
worst case scenario, right? Make your data a strength. Make data protection a strength for you as opposed to that being the last thing you think about. Because once you think about data protection as a strength, that leads to a lot of different capabilities. Like I said, you don't have to worry about being held hostage or your data being exfiltrated and being exposed or being made vulnerable. That's one thing. The second thing it does is it provides you cyber resiliency, right? If you can prevent an attack that impacts your data, you automatically created a pathway to faster recovery and minimize the disruption to your business, right?
Right.
And that gives you a peace of mind. As we say, what do you do at Sotero? The question when we get asked that, my response is we help people sleep well at night, not worrying about a potential threat to their data.
Excellent. Well, I think we're just about done. There are a couple of questions from the audience. Um, so, given DSPM as a category since early stages, how do you see the evolution continuing over time?
Very early stages for DSPM. Obviously, there are many different ideas of what a DSPM should be. Some companies think it's mostly about policy management in the cloud. Um, right? We take a very different approach to DSPM and say, would in our mind, a DSPM capability is holistic, should enable organizations to do everything from discovery, classification, data protection to ongoing threat detection and prevention. Right, that's the broad set of capabilities for all different data types. The other key thing for a DSPM capability in our mind is everybody's focused on the cloud, but there are very few organizations that are 100% cloud enabled, right? There's a lot of data that's still on premise or on legacy platforms. So you want to think about a platform that can support you both on premise for legacy technology as well as be capable of supporting all of the emerging and new technology in the cloud. I think that's the eventual evolution of what a DSPM platform will look like.
I think that's a really important thing to sort of stress. And something that came out in research I've done is for a lot of organizations, especially the larger one where you have a CISO, chief information security officer, or a chief information officer, they're really concerned with just protecting their data and securing their data, regardless of where that data lives. And one of the things that a lot of people have told me is I don't think about my data as living in the cloud or living in on prem or living in an endpoint because it moves around so quickly. And if I have, say, for instance, an application in a database running in the cloud and somebody runs a report on it, that report ends up on, with that sensitive data, ends up on an endpoint right on somebody's laptop so they can use it. Right.
Yeah,
So those are,
absolutely. I mean, if you talk to the large companies or even the smaller companies, right? Even if they use a platform or an application in the cloud, the simple question as to where the data originates leads you back to a legacy platform or a legacy as a not cloud enabled platform, right?
right.
If if a security platform or a security product doesn't provide consistent security for both the source of the data and the target, then it's a half of a security product.
Yep. I definitely agree with that. So I think the next question we talked about a little bit, but let's just talk about it one more time is should data security solutions be complementary to all the other security solutions that we have?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why we refer to them as data security solutions, right? I mean, there are other security capabilities that are complementary and need to be in place for a holistic, comprehensive security capabilities for companies. You take about identity access management. That's another thing that absolutely should be in there. Laptop encryption seems very tactical, but it's very critical if an employee happens to lose or gets their device stolen in the event that there's some sensitive attribute data on it, or even user IDs and passwords. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and as we discussed, the SIM and the SOAR capabilities have to be there for analysis, analytics, and decision making. Data security platforms, products should be a part of the overall capabilities. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I definitely believe that as well. I'm a very big believer in defense in depth, right? Where there are so many different ways for attackers to get access to our data, that the more tools we apply to protect against various different attack paths, the better we are and the more
Yeah, and
secure.
that's if there's one lesson that the attackers have taught us and the rest of the industry is that they have absolutely validated that defense in depth is critical, and that the one weak spot that exists today is data security, right? So
Yep.
putting in that layer to work with the rest of the frameworks is absolutely critical.
Well, excellent. Well, I know there are some other questions, and we've sort of run out of time, so we will definitely get to those questions afterwards. We'll get in touch with everybody who asked questions. Purandar, I'd really like to thank you for joining me. This was a great discussion, and I hope our audience has learned as much as I have. Thank you.
Jack, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
I'd like to thank our audience as well for attending.